Everybody, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
You know, I'm really grateful that all of you are here. There are so many people. There are people in the other room. I know, we've got croissants for you, but I love the fact that you're here and this matters. So when we come to questions, ask them. You're putting in time here. Let's make this fun and interesting for everybody. Governor, thank you for joining us. Isn't it kind of strange that you hear a senator from Utah who might make a great candidate for governor of Connecticut?
Yeah.
I mean, you guys sound so much on the same page. But
Not
I guess,
on the last part.
Well, I just want to ask you, though, so we were talking in the green room about the hard choices you've had to make as governor during your tenure, and I know you're leaving in January of this next year. You're giving up this position, and you've taken the state in some very, very interesting directions on sentencing reform, on prison reform, and I'm interested in the hard choices that you were talking about. Are any of them in this arena?
No, I think that the things that we've done in this arena are relatively easy because they're smart. They're based on science as opposed to perception, and we have learned in Connecticut and elsewhere what works and what doesn't work. So no, I think this has been relatively easy to propose. Some of the proposals I've made haven't been enacted in my own state, but they actually have been enacted in other states, which is interesting. No, the criminal justice reform is the smart thing.
You know, I was reading a lot about you in the last couple of days, and one of the features that came out was your wife, Kathy. And in particular, there was this discussion of a conference you organized. We should have hired you to organize this conference, but you did a conference called Redefining Justice. You reached out to the Koch brothers, the Koch Foundation, to help fund it. And Kathy just comes through the pages as someone who's, at a human level, really into this. What's going on there?
Well, first and foremost, we're partners. We met on April 6, 1974, at a party in Brighton, Massachusetts.
You know the minute and hour?
Pretty much. My body of work and her body of work have been in tandem from the very get-go. I mean, I think one of the most extraordinary things about my wife is she's mentoring a person who was a woman who was incarcerated for 23 years for, as you might imagine, a very serious offense. We take this to heart. We talk about criminal justice reform and justice generally in our daily conversations. It's part of who we are.
So I'm trying to understand how you've approached this ecosystem. You just made a comment about it being logical, it being science. It is very political in a sense that when you begin laying off workers in your prison system, which Connecticut has been doing, 180 workers you've laid off recently. You've got declining, declining beds, declining, I shouldn't say beds, but declining incarcerees, I should say. And you've succeeded on a recidivism in 4 different areas. When we were in Oklahoma recently with Mary Fallin, the governor of Oklahoma, she gave much the same line. I am interested in the degree in which your example, the frame that you have in Connecticut, is what we're seeing in Oklahoma, what we're seeing in South Dakota, we're seeing in a lot of red states as well. And what are the similarities that you're finding as you talk to governors about what the buttons are to push?
Well, first and foremost, I hope we're pushing it a little bit further than other folks. I think that the science of human development, particularly with respect to young adults, people between the ages of 18 and 25, most particularly, where we've actually started units in prison specifically tending to the needs and, quite frankly, some of the possibilities of that age group are very significant. I think criminal justice reform can be driven because you want to save money, or it can be driven because you want to save lives. Mm-hmm. I'm in that group,
right.
and I want. I think it makes little sense to send people who you don't have to send to prison where they're likely to get an advanced degree in criminal behavior. And I think that, as a former trial attorney, as a former prosecutor in New York City, I saw too many judges send people to jail because they were frustrated with this young person who appeared before them. Not because the crime itself required necessarily that person be incarcerated, but frustration took over, and then all of a sudden you open up this opportunity for a lifetime of criminal behavior. So you asked a specific question. Are there similarities between folks who want to simply save money and those who want to save lives? There are similarities, but I think there are separate motivations. I think every wasted soul is just that. I think every damaged individual because of incarceration who really didn't need to be incarcerated, wasn't in theirs or society's best interest, is a potential problem for society to deal with on a much longer term basis with respect to employment and cost of benefits because they can't get employment, and forced involvement in future criminal endeavors, because we do have gang communities in some of our state prisons. We've got to be careful about this stuff. We've got to be more careful about this stuff.
How many people, I mean, I was interested in how you sort of talk about the justice system or the judge being frustrated with the person being sentenced or dealt with. And what comes to mind right now is I just reading some of the things about you, wonder how bigoted is the prison system in Connecticut?
I hope less than other places.
But but when you talk about the behavior of someone who's committed some crime, part of that frustration, what you're saying is that judge is allowing other factors than the crime to come in. And I'm just, when you look at the massive incarceration of blacks, of Hispanics, and others in the system, so how do you undo that?
Well, listen, I talk about race all the time because I think that it does represent this great lasting divide in American society. It's one of the lines of that great divide. I'm not accusing people who sentence people to jail because they're frustrated with racism, although it may have disproportionate impacts on a black community versus a white community. But what I really want to get at the heart of is we need to have more opportunities to deal with particularly young people, young offenders, than we currently have. And if we create those additional opportunities, then we're likely to have better long-term results, as opposed to simply managing someone's life for the next 30, 90, 120 days or 3 years. I think that we simply can do better when we use the science of brain development and maturation to our advantage as opposed to our disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. And I was also noticing, again, on the gender issue, that in Connecticut, with your declining prison population, the percentage of men is down 20%, the percentage of women is down 7%. Why the gap?
I think there are societal reasons. I think that criminal behavior has become more universal as opposed to less universal. But I also think that we were not paying as much attention. We have one women's prison, and I think that now that we are paying more attention to that prison, and quite frankly, a very gifted corrections commissioner in Scott Semple, we're going to drive that population down. So I think we're actually now getting closer to 10%. The male population is down about 21, 22% since I became governor. We can, within the next administration, whoever will be governor, actually have halved our prison population based on current projections using crime statistics, recidivism statistics. We're in good shape to do some of these things. Now, you know, it costs us $168 a night to house somebody. We can use that money more effectively in other arenas, including addressing some of the underlying traumas. Women in prison are more likely to be drug or alcohol dependent, statistically. Certainly have suffered as many, if not more, traumas, and those traumas are frequently as a result of spousal or familial abuse, including a rape. So we're dealing with a very difficult audience of people, perhaps more difficult in women's prisons than male prisons, given those traumas, those sets of traumas and behaviors.
You know, one of the questions we have, you know, we've seen
which simply means we have to work harder,
right?
And we should work harder.
A lot of our news right now is focused on the tragedy in Parkland, students standing up and asking for a very, very different gun environment, different sort of stewardship in states. And this is a real tragedy. And I guess in anticipation, I wanted to ask you really a question about the resiliency of the reforms you had. If Nicholas Cruz had been in Stamford, if this had unfolded in Connecticut, What would be happening as you were responding to this, and would it be harder or easier to stand by the science and by the results that you've generated, or would you see a tsunami of reaction that we need a very different system, harsher system?
We had that experience at Sandy Hook School. Right. And it did not waylay us from the overall commitment to doing a better job in criminal justice systems, including the correction portion of that system. So I've been there. Right. Having said that, in Connecticut, based on some of the laws that we changed, you couldn't buy that weapon that was used in Connecticut, and that's true in 7 states in the District of Columbia. And what I would also say, picking up on the latter part of the discussion that I just witnessed. I mean, listen, I think we absolutely have to be careful about people recovering their access to guns when they're healthy. But I don't think that should stop us from making sure that they don't have access to guns when they're not healthy. And therein, I think, lies the great divide. I mean, the idea that taking someone to a gun range to fire an AR-15 as part of their therapy when you're actually not treating the underlying difficulties doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and don't be surprised if bad things happen as a result.
When you're talking to gun owners, at what point, putting yourself in other folks' shoes, what is the line? You know, I know it's complicated to ask, but what is the line where gun owners' rights ought to be in place? How do you manage that equilibrium?
A safety, a balance of safety and the Second Amendment. Clearly, our laws have been tested in the federal courts and come back and been upheld, and that includes not allowing the sale of AR-15. So you can do this. It can go through a federal court challenge, and you can survive, because the right's not absolute. You can't have a tank because we make tanks. You can't have a flamethrower because we make flamethrowers. You can't have a grenade because we make grenades. Arguably, all of those things are types of guns. So I think we just need a better balance in our society. And when a particular weapon has become the weapon of choice, and it is more like anything. It's more like a machine gun than anything we've seen since the 1930s. In effect, with a bump stock or other devices, it is a machine gun. We should have a reasonable discussion about how we limit access to folks. Or at least, how about this? I mean, really, this is the question that should have been asked. What's wrong with universal background checks? Why should 40% of gun sales go unmonitored in the United States? In whose mind does that make any sense when 97% of the American people want that to happen? And overwhelmingly, when you quiz people, they think it already happens.
You know, Senators Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin pushed that background checks legislation in reaction to Sandy Hook. How disappointed are you that so little happened after Sandy Hook, and that now we're back into another similar horrific tragedy?
Well, you know, Florida had another tragedy in Orlando, and you know, I'm reminded of what I said 2 days after Sandy Hook, that this is coming to your town. This is going to happen at a theater near you, or a restaurant, or a church, or a school, or a community college, or a university campus. I mean, the reality is, because of the way guns change hands unregulated in the United States, without regard to how lethal they are, this is part of our societal shared experience. And the reality is that we've gotten used to it. It drives. I hope this is different. I hope it's different, but I think we're more likely to make progress on a state-by-state basis than you are to change the minds of United States senators, in many cases whose campaigns were underwritten by the NRA, or change the mind of a president who accepted $30 million towards his campaign from the NRA so that he might be elected. You know, I noted that the president told people that he had lunch over the last weekend with representatives of the NRA, some of the top leaders. I hope he picked up the lunch tab.
You know, I know Mark Holden of Coke is going to be on the next panel, and they have a thing at Coke Industry where they're talking about safe streets, second chances. You've talked about a second chance society, and what you're really talking about is giving people talent out there another opportunity after speed bumps in their lives. What do we need to do? What do we need to turn that from being a kind of cute boutique phrase into something that's felt more broadly in a society, that there's a commitment to bring people into jobs, opportunities, counseling, maybe mental health help and support? What are the other ecosystem pieces of this that we need to understand better than we do?
Well, it's how long, you know, we don't have enough time.
Well,
I'll say this, that A, we should avoid crimes being committed, right? That's number one. Number two, when crimes get committed by individuals, we should make sound judgments about their propensity to commit other crimes or not. If someone has to be incarcerated or should be incarcerated because of the nature of the offense, we have to make sure that that incarceration is for an appropriate period of time and not driven by one's race, for instance. And then ultimately, what we need to do, and one of the things that we've done very, very successfully in Connecticut, is have people spend their time differently. We get people ready over a 6 to 18 month period of time to go back to society, in which we reintroduce them to society, in which we give them the training that they need. We make sure that they are immediately have available to them the resources necessary to be successful, particularly in the area of medical care and mental health care. If people have a history of addiction to opioids, we really should, if medically assisted treatment is the one most likely to result in positively, then that service should be established before they're released. I mean, there are just smart things you can do, and yes, we need to find more jobs. Now, a fully employed society is going to require that we do a better job, and we should take advantage of that opportunity. But listen, we need to forgive. We need to move on, and we need to stop punishing people for things that they don't deserve to be punished anymore. And quite frankly, we should stop punishing ourselves because we're so invested in being a punishing society. I think when you find the right, when you can balance these things appropriately, you're going to have better results. And that's what I think should be driving us is, yes, people do bad things or make mistakes. They particularly do that when they're young. Do you really want to penalize someone for the rest of their life, which means you really want to penalize broader society for the rest of that person's life?
Just in a quick snapshot, I'm going to go to all of you in just a moment, but just to give us a quick snapshot, you apparently had an experience in Germany of visiting a jail. And apparently it made a big impact. If the Atlantic article I read is accurate, and I hope
everything
it was.
You read in the Atlantic.
Yeah, in the Atlantic. Yeah. So, but that you saw in real form, in 3D form, a correction system, not a penal system, even for those that had committed pretty horrific crimes. How is that, just in short form, how has that shaped your frame, and what should we all understand from what you saw and experienced in this German system that we don't have a great facility with as we discuss these issues?
We don't treat humans as humans if they're in prison. Let that sink in. And as a result, they are less human when they come out. And I think in the German system, what you're invested in is changing behaviors, and what you're invested in is keeping families intact, and what you're invested in is using this opportunity for education and job training. What you're invested in, for instance, is allowing someone to leave your campus after they've been trained for a job, getting ready to be released, so that they actually maintain a job and have an experience of maintaining a job before they are fully released. I mean, we just can do better. We can change people's behaviors negatively or positively. For the most part, we've chosen to do it negatively. And this is a broader discussion about how do we do that in a positive way? How do we actually invest in changing behaviors? I referenced our True unit at one of our prisons. We are treating 18-year-olds to 25-year-olds differently than we're treating the older population. Why? Because the science is very clear that, particularly in the male population, that maturation continues at least to age 25. That someone at the age of 18 is more like a 16-year-old than they are a 26-year-old. And why don't we develop systems of treatment within our facilities when someone has to be incarcerated that is mindful of real science, not guessing, not old presumptions, but is based on where people are. In the German system, you have more social workers and psychologists working in the system than you have corrections officers. Corrections officers are as much lending guidance on how the operation should exist on the floor that day than they are people who are themselves involved in punishing people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me go to all of you. Let me have a question, comment, right here in the front. Or we've got somebody. Sorry, we'll get to you next. We'll get to you next.
We can do a couple of these.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Breyer with the National Juvenile Justice Network, and I want to thank you, Governor Malloy, for your leadership in justice reform. We've been holding Connecticut up as an example for the rest of the country for how to treat youth right. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to Connecticut's participation in the Federal Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, and how the act or what your goals are for youth justice reform going forward.
Well, Connecticut was late in raising the age for a different treatment. And when I became governor, the law had been passed to take 16 and 17-year-olds out of the adult system and treat them differently. But I'm the guy who had to implement it, which meant I had to withstand the pressure of going back to the old system. It was the right thing to do. It moved us in the right direction. We have been very punitive, and when you start to be punitive with respect to 16-year-olds for minor offenses, or 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 or 21, it just doesn't make sense, and it's not supported by the science. We know we have a much better chance of turning that behavioral pattern around at that age than we do at another age. We know if we get somebody to the age of 23 or 24, and we do that successfully. We transport them from having made a mistake in their life to a period of greater maturation, and we do that without doing additional damage. That person is far more likely to be successful. And that's what I'm doing.
Yes, hi. There you go.
Hi, Governor. My name is Kiana Johnson, and I'm a returning citizen. And I just have a quick question. You talked a little bit about the judges and them being sometimes over punishing. What is a recourse? How do you deal with, as a society, it's becoming more prevalent. How do we deal with that?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think part of that is just raising statistics help. Changing the bail system helps. All of a sudden, we have changed our bail system so that people aren't staying in jail for the lack of $1 or the lack of a couple of $100. The damage that is done by separating an individual from the broader society for just a matter of days. If you live in a single-room occupancy dwelling and you don't show up that day, you lose where you live. If you had a job, you lose the job. So we were doing some really the wrong things when it came to very minor offenses for which most people would never be incarcerated anyway. 85% of people who come to the courthouse charged with a crime aren't going to do a single day of jail. So we need to make sure that that is broadly applied to Hispanic populations and Asian populations and black populations and Caucasian populations, and we need to use statistics to hold ourselves to that.
Yes, ma'am, right here.
Hi, Gabby Alessi Friedlander from Convergence Center for Policy Resolution. I wanted to focus specifically on your work on reentry and also your experience as a former prosecutor. In conducting our roundtables, we've had some difficulty having prosecutors and judges understand that they have a role to play in reentry. We're very firm in the belief that reentry begins day one of the sentence. So how would you suggest getting those on the front end to understand that reentry is across the spectrum.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have, first of all, if we can help, let us know. I've got some good people working on this in Connecticut, and they're not just political appointees. They're part of the overall employee base of the state. Happy to reach out. I think there are judges who are more interested in this than others. I think there are prosecutors who are more interested in this than others. But, you know, here, Connecticut's violent crime rate has dropped more than any other state in the nation over the last 4 years. How about that one? How about the idea that good positive change actually produces better results? That a crime prevented from happening is as important, if not more important, than catching the person who committed a crime, right? And I think there's this different way that you need to look at the criminal justice system, which should be based on what the results of that system are, as opposed to what the perceived goal of the system is. Our goals have been wrong. If it's universal access to punishment, including the broader society at great expense to itself, and far worse results over the remaining life of that individual, then we need to re-examine those propositions.
Governor, just as we wrap up, I've spent some time recently with Chuck Robbins. He's the CEO of Cisco Systems, and Richard Branson, of course, of Virgin. And both of them surprised me by saying that one of the things they were committed to were hiring people who had been convicts, who've come out, who had great skills. Who are some of the other heroes, if you know them, in the corporate community who are stepping out to do that? Because that's also a political act in the business world, and it's a risk-taking act, and I'm just wondering if that's part of what you think has to happen.
There are companies in America that are doing that and won't talk about it. And that's a great shame. We need more leaders to step forward, and the Kochs are doing that, you know, and we don't agree on a whole lot, quite frankly. Let's share that, if you hadn't figured it out already. But they're helping. I mean, their leadership on this has been very, very important. And we just need more companies to step out and do this. You know, this is the way I'll put it. If I'm good enough to be a customer at your store or for your service, even though I have a criminal history, then I should be good enough to work in your store or in your business, right? If you want access to the millions of people who have a criminal justice involvement as your customer, then you owe it to them to treat them with respect, and there's nothing more respectful than a job. That's what I would say to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Connecticut Governor Dan Malloy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.